Okay, so the session has been recorded this afternoon. Thanks everyone for giving us your time, and hopefully you'll find it a very useful session. I'm going to start with some polls, and this is in order to give me a chance of getting to know who we're talking to. Have you already decided to run DIT for next September? Or if you're already running, please select yes. We've had 100% answering on that. Let me show you. Everyone answered, so mostly yes and some no. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much for that. We've got another couple of questions, and then I promise I'll get on to starting to give you some information. I'd just be interested, if you don't mind, in giving me some kind of background about what it is you're currently offering in Key Stage 4 in the digital arena to your students. And this will help me to understand, well, oh, so half of you are doing computer science. So I wonder, and as we get on with the session today, it might be interesting to understand whether you're actually looking at. Okay, so thank you for that. Everybody has answered that. Let me share that with you. So interestingly, what we're looking at here is no CIDA, DIDA, or the OCRs. We're looking at computer science and iMedia teachers. So very, very interesting. Thank you for that. And nearly finished with the questions. Got one more, and then I'm going to crack on. Would you consider yourself to be an expert in BTEC delivery? In other words, please select yes if. Oh wow. Okay, that was close. That was quick. So nobody considers themselves. Let me share that with you. No one considers yourself an expert. So what that means is that one of the barriers that you may be feeling to moving to BTEC might be related to the assessment model. So I'll be very happy to talk you through elements of that to hopefully demystify and make that a less of a hurdle. So. All right, everyone. So I'm going to be talking about why I believe the BTEC Level 1/2 Tech Award in Digital Information Technology is a good option for your Key Stage 4 students for next year. I've got 37 slides in this deck. I won't be spending much time on many of these slides, so hopefully there's no need to make this any more painful than it needs to be on a beautiful afternoon like this. I'm going to have a quick buzz through the actual components of the DIT qualification, how they're assessed, how it's graded. I'm going to show you where some of the resources are that will help with the delivery, talk about practical support, and talk about the digital options for your Key Stage 4 learners. All of our Tech Awards, which is our new Level 2 qualifications, are fitting into the standard vocational category, which is that we cover knowledge and skills, we embed that with understanding, and then in terms of the assessment, what we try to do is make sure that the assessment is done by applying those skills to a vocational scenario in the assessment. The BTEC Tech Award in DIT fits into the open group in the Performance 8. So, and we've just had confirmation from the DFE that will be included in it's in 2020, and it will also be in 21 and also be in 22. So the DFE have recently declared that the qualifications that have qualified for Tech Award status for 2020 will be automatically retained in 21 and 22. They do reserve the right to cut a qualification out of that list, but since the DIT has only just been added to the list. It's passed the most recent rigor in terms of the quality of the qualification. So we're quite confident that it's not going to be something that they're going to be looking to withdraw the performance status for. The qualification is a very simple qualification in terms of 3 units, no options. So 2 of the units are internally assessed units, making 60% of the qualification. Component 3 is an exam, which comprises the balance 40%. So in terms of its structure, there's nothing complex about it. 60% internally assessed and 40% externally assessed. Just to talk about the grading, the internally assessed components have grades, the grades level 2 distinction, level 2 merit, level 2 pass, and then below that 2 grades which are level 1 pass and level 1 merit. What's missing here is level 1 distinction, and this is something to do with the design of the assessment, and we'll look at the assessment grids later. For the internally assessed components, they didn't feel that they could differentiate between the level 1 distinction and the level 2 pass sufficiently, so they've got less gradation in those components. And in the internally assessed components, any one of those grades that is achieved on the component will be equivalent to a certain number of points, which are then added to give you the overall qualification outcome. So that's the internal components, components 1 and 2. Component 3 here in the green box shows that there's 7 including you. And in this case, the number of points that go along with one of the grades, there is a range of points. I'll explain that a little bit later. So you add 2 sets of points from the internal to the points that you have for the external, and that's what determines the final grade. And here are those points here. So in the final qualification grade, it goes all the way up to distinction star, down to level 1 pass. And for the internal assessed units, here are the 5 grade boundaries, and the points that are fixed for the level 2 merit is always 29 points. The distinction always 36, and for the internally assessed units, you never get points in between. It's those points and nothing else. For the externally assessed units, you can see that there's a range of points. So a really strong level 2 merit might get as many as 41 points, where somebody that just scraped a level 2 merit would have 36. They're added together, and that's what says what the final grade is. When you look at the outcomes, the distinction star is equivalent to 8.5 points on the new 9-to-1 performance tables. The level 1 pass, the level 1 distinction is at 3, and the level 2 pass is 4. So here you've got your 4 and above area, and here you've got your 3 and below area. Component 3 is a synoptic component. Component 3 is the externally assessed units. You can see the dark blue chunks here are all of the content. So learning aim A, B, C, and D from component 3. And then component 1, the internal assessed, and component 2, internally assessed. What we're showing here is that there are opportunities while delivering the internally assessed units to cover the subject content for component 3. And it's very much useful to have this kind of thing in mind when you're doing your delivery or planning your delivery, that a lot of unit 3 can be done in parallel, and it has links and ties to the content that you'll be teaching in the internally assessed components. This helps you to plan your program of study, and also helps to buy that time that is so essential, so that you can make sure that your cohort are able to avail of one resit for component 3, so that you will have covered the component 3 material in time to maybe have your first sitting in the January of the students' year 11, and then the possibility of a resit in the summer of their year 11. So that's what this slide is showing. The internally assessed units, components are component 1, where we're looking at user interface design and development. There's also some project planning material in there, and then there's looking at how to develop and review a digital user interface. Component 2, so that's component 1. User interface design at least gives us the ability to give students some color and shape and design work to do. And so we're hoping that students who like to think about the way things look and build things and look at the aesthetics as well as the functionality will have something to look at there. In component 2, it's very much a data component. It's not a database component. It's about helping students understand the value and power of data and how individuals and organizations today value and use that commodity. We then ask them to develop a dashboard using data manipulation tools, and some of the stuff that they've learned in user interface designers in terms of aesthetics and layouts and presentation will come in to the work that they do in component 2. And then we finally want them to be able to demonstrate that they can take raw data and present it and analyze it for a particular purpose. So they're the 2 components that are internally assessed. Now, what's really interesting to look at, since the DFE decided to remove GCSE ICT from the menu for our students, this qualification, in order to qualify as a Tech Award, had to comply with some quite tight constraints that were put upon us. Number 1, there was to be no overlap with Key Stage 3 content. That meant that we couldn't do standard kinds of what we used to do in terms of ICT projects, which was, building things like brochures, leaflets, models, in spreadsheets, maybe even doing databases. All of that is assumed now to be part of Key Stage 3, so we had to avoid that. The other constraint was that we must not overlap at all with any of the subject content contained in GCSE computer science. So it was in that gap that this qualification has been built to fit. And in particular, I think component 1 with the user interface focus can be interesting and inspiring for the students and engaging. Some of the project planning techniques I feel are dry, but we're not the only people that have had to find something to fill the course that was useful, but not in Key Stage 3 and not in computer science. Component 2, I think, is a real gem of a component, because I don't think there's another qualification out there that is trying to help our young people understand and arm themselves with the tools to be able to work the data. So I like the 2 internal components. Yeah, it could have been more whiz bang and more creative, but we had real constraints. So now we're talking about the internally assessed units. Now, this is where it's very interesting for those of you who, please do put your hand up if you want to ask a question. For those of you who are not familiar with BTEC delivery, and you've all claimed not to be experts, there are some things that are different. So if what you've been doing before has been coursework and moderation, the BTEC assessment model is very different. Assignment briefs are the tools that we use to perform assessments. And the way that we build BTECs is that you can do assessments at every learning aim. So if you do learning aim A of component 1, you can teach it, you can do a practice assessment, and then you'll have a handout date at which you give the students the formal assessment vehicle. That will be an assignment brief which will have a vocational scenario. A vocational scenario, very clear deadlines. It will have tasks. Those tasks will be clearly defined by the vocational scenario. You know, you're not asked to do anything that doesn't make sense in that scenario. The tasks are mapped to the learning aims and the assessment criteria, because it's that you want the students to evidence. And then it has to make very clear what the evidence requirements are. This assignment brief is the vehicle that's used for assessment. We, Pearson Edexcel, don't give you the assessment vehicle. We provide authorized assignment briefs, which are good models, good starting places. You can modify them, you can tweak them, you can use them almost as they are, or you can completely write your own. The key thing about the BTEC assessment model is that it's your assessment, not ours. Once you've done the assessment of Learning Aim A, then you might go to teach Learning Aim B and do the assessment for Learning Aim B. Then you might do Learning Aim C and do the assessment for Learning Aim C. Once those assessments have been done, you will have contact with your standards verifier, SV, that's the first person outside the school, and they will ask for a sample of students' work. If they agree with your assessments, then every student in your cohort that you've done the assessment on that mark is given. If they have a problem with your assessment, they give you a corrective action report. Things that, you know, either you've been too lenient, or you've missed something, or the students need to add something, or you lower the marks. But within short time, I think it's a 10-day commitment, you have knowledge of how to move on, so you don't get into a bad place. So here are the learning aims for component 1. Investigate user interface design for individuals and organizations. Use project planning techniques to plan and design a user interface, and then develop a user interface. Now, this is classic BTEC structure: investigate, research, plan, design, develop. So think about, do, build. This is the way that, and we try. This is very, very instilled in the BTEC ethos. Is the idea that the students should actually make something, if at all possible. Sometimes we have to fall back on it being making a report when a unit happens to be a very technical one or a very theoretical one. But in the case of the DIT, we've got the chance where they can do their own mock-up of a user interface for a particular case and get the chance to evidence the assessment criteria. Component 2 is investigate the role and impact of data. Then they create a dashboard using data manipulation tools, and then they draw conclusions. So this is slightly different to the standard BTEC model, but they are making something. It's a dashboard using data, and this can be creative and colorful. I'll talk about that later. And then showing that their understanding is there in terms of the conclusions they draw and the reviewing of the way that they've presented it, given the vocational scenario they were given. So that's a massively quick run through the 2 internal components. For the externally assessed component, which is component 3, it's effective digital working practice. It is a synoptic unit, it's a written paper, and there are 2 sittings every year. So the first sitting of this will be in the January-February of 2020. So if you can organize your delivery so that students can take the exam at that time, then they will have a resit opportunity in the summer of 2020. And then every year after that, it will be January, summer, or February, summer. The question paper is always 60 marks. It will always have 4 tasks. It will never have a multiple choice question. One of the requirements to seek to approval. There will always be 2 6-mark questions and always 1 9-mark question. And then the balance of the questions will be 4, 3, 2, and 1-mark questions. An hour and a half, 60 marks. We've got a very small number of command words, and I've been promised by the assessment team that they will stick very closely to these, and we're hoping, in fact, to provide more detail and even weight the command words by number of marks. So we're starting from a good place in that there's a very short number of them. What I would like to do, and we're hoping to move to do, is to make sure that every time describe is used, it's going to be a certain number of marks. Things to consider. So we talked about how there are all of the content from component 3 can be taught alongside components 1 and 2. So we've got loads of resources to show you, which I'll get onto, I promise. I just want to, especially since you all said that you didn't consider yourselves experts in BTEC, let's talk about the team, okay? This slide here, and by the way, all of these things that you see now, I believe, are part of the materials that are available to you. So do please dip into that, if not now, after the event, and you'll be able to find all of these things. Down here, there's a reference to a 25-minute YouTube tutorial. This was a discussion that I happened to capture where I was talking to teachers, or a teacher who literally had never done BTEC before and was very uncertain about how it worked, and I talked step by step through the cycles of assessment and the documents that were required. So that 25-minute, if you're worried that you just don't get the way that the BTEC assessment works, this might be worth a listen to. Here on the left of the screen, you see the team. These are in your center. Every center that is allowed to deliver BTECs has to have a quality nominee. Now, usually that's somebody who's in a senior leadership role in the school. Sometimes the exams officer might take that role. It's a dual role, an administrative and a quality control role, quality nominee. Below that is the lead internal verifier. So every program, so if you're doing BTEC Sport, BTEC Sport will have an LIV. If you're doing the DIT program, that program will have an LIV. Now, here's where I want to talk, though. Assessor. So we all know when we're delivering an assessment, we get the work in and we're going to mark it. That's the assessor. So that's me, the classroom teacher. So who's the internal verifier? Well, if you're a two-man team in a school, let's say the head of IT would take the role of lead internal verifier. Now, the head of IT might also mark some students' work, in which case that head of ICT is also assessor. If there's another person in the team, then that person would internally verify the assessments done by this person. Okay. Now, if both members of the team have classes, at one point they'll both be the assessor and they'll mark their own work, and then they'll both be the internal verifier and do the checking on each other's marking. It's no problem that the lead internal verifier is one of these two people. The lead internal verifier role is to work with the quality nominee and the rest of the delivery team. Sometimes it's more than, sometimes it's a large number of people. Sometimes it's just two people. Sometimes it's one. I'll talk about that in a second. So the lead internal verifier has leeway to look at the assessment and whether individual students deserve to have a resubmission opportunity or a retake. All of those things are in the prevail of the lead internal verifier to decide, okay? So if you have a one-person team in IT, it's obvious who the lead internal verifier is. It's obvious that that person is also going to be doing the assessment, the setting of the assignments for students and the marking of their work. Who then performs the job of the IV? And the answer to that is in a one-person department, this role would be undertaken by a colleague in your school who has BTEC experience, but maybe not IT. So, for example, if you do BTEC business in your school, one of the BTEC business teachers could IV your IT work. Now, that BTEC business person might not be an IT teacher and may struggle to interpret the finer points of some of the assessment criteria, but they will have experience of doing BTEC assessment, looking at assessment criteria and looking at students' work. So they're perfectly able to perform the role of IV, or it's checking. So you can ask some critical questions, get the backup, feel that things are going in the right direction, and that's the role. That's how that would be done in a one-person team. On the right-hand side here is a standards verifier. Now, this is the equivalent of your moderator if you were doing coursework and moderation. This is the first person that is outside of your center. The role of this person is to work with the lead internal verifier as early as possible to understand when you plan to do assessments and when samples are likely to be ready, and then to ask for samples. It's normally 4 people from one component a year, I believe, unless something goes wrong. And then all of the documentation, I'll show you where that is later. So the standards verifiers are allocated to your center, and it's triggered by registrations. So you won't get an SV unless you've registered students. And here's another place where BTEC is different to some other qualifications. At the beginning of your program, you have to register your students. You can't run year 10 through and then in year 11 enter them. It has to be registered at the beginning of the program. That registration of students onto a program triggers the allocation of an SV. And we hope to have SV. So, and the registration deadline is November. So September, October, when you're back to school, all the registrations should be done. By February, your SV will be in place. And then March, April, May is normally around May that they like to have any samples that need to be looked at for that year. They like to have around May. But there isn't a set date. You arrange this with your SV, you coordinate and discuss. And from the moment that the SV is known to you, you're free to contact them to ask for support and help and to clarify any questions or issues, to decide on what format you want to share the evidence in so that there's no surprises and they have access and they're able to, and they're happy with a Dropbox or they're happy with a memory stick, or so all of those discussions happen ahead of time. If your samples go in early May to the SV, you're guaranteed a report back in X number of days. I think it's 10 working days. I don't honestly remember, but in that report you will either have clearance, all of your assessments we back up and you can enter them onto Edexcel Online, or you've got these things to do because there's some issues. So you've got that dialogue and the ability to address any issues that come up. What happens if you start the qualification in year 9? You do, yes. If you decide to start your students on a 3-year delivery program, you have to register them at the beginning of the delivery program, whether it's 2 years or 3 years. I say have to, supposed to. It's because we need to make sure that if in year 9 you want to have any samples looked at, you need to have an SV allocated, and that won't happen if you haven't registered. And it's part of the terms and conditions of running a BTEC is that you have to be an approved center and you have to have registered students. So, but it's not a problem to do it over 3 years, absolutely not. But just register up front. Then you're in our system and you have our support. Honestly, it's not about getting your cash. That's not my motive by any means. Okay, so that's massively quick flash through the way it works. So we won't know our SV before Feb. If we have questions, who are we supposed to talk to? Can we register students now? So Dominic, if you register students now in, where are we, July? We are in July. There's a, yeah, you can register them. There might be a late fee, but it's not like in GQ where it's a double. It's not a punitive thing. It's a small increment in money. And then who do you talk to before then? Me. And I can, you know, if it's a question that needs to go to the assessment experts, I have access to them and I can pass stuff on. Many of the questions I can answer and help with, and certainly for things that go beyond my remit, you know, if we want, you know, if we want to really get some commitment on an assessment criteria interpretation, it's better that we get that from the assessment team, and I'll make sure that happens. So yeah, don't hesitate to get registered. Don't worry about the support. You'll get that through me. But you know, if we can get the registrations done, and I don't know whether they'll. So in terms of support, okay, so we're leading on to support here. This is a horrible slide. There's lots of paid for resources. Let me show you where to get to them. There's paid for resources which you see here, which include lesson plans, lesson content, and activities and activity solutions. They're paid for. What we provide free are schemes of work. So these resources plug into the schemes of work. Let me show you now. If we go to our DIT, I'm just flapping. Hopefully you can see. Yeah, you can see my screen. I'm just going to go to the DIT pages on the website. What was I showing you? Lesson plans, course materials. So the details about everything we provide free are under course materials. The details about the published resources are here. If you can't find this after this event, or you're struggling to find anything, just email me and I'll help you through. So if we look at the course materials, under teaching and learning, there's assessment plan templates. So the way the BTEC works is that early on, when you first have contact with your SV, they'll ask for an assessment plan. And this is a way of having the conversation about when you plan to have Learning Aim A done, when you plan to do Learning Aim B, when you plan to do Learning Aim C, whether you plan to combine B and C, when are you likely to be able to hand stuff to an SV? So they look at a plan over the 2 or 3 years delivery. That assessment plan, we've got a component, we've got some templates there that can start you working. We've got course planners for 1 year and 2 years. We've got FAQs here for the DIT. There's a guide here which is quite interesting reading. We've got some mapping documents if you're coming from different qualifications. There's past training events already, so some of the stuff that we're covering today actually will be in the Getting Ready to Teach. I think the presentation I stole is similar to these. And here are the schemes of work. So component 1, component 2, and component 3 schemes of work. So they don't go down to lesson plans and activities. They're in the paid for, but they do have the schedules and the lesson content and everything. And so those schemes of work. There's some stuff here in materials that are used for component 2 because it's a key thing in component 2, which is the data component, that we're not looking for students to spend loads of time generating data. We don't want them out doing questionnaires and capturing data. Let's give them a big chunk of data and let them do their work using that. So I think that's what you'll find in there. And then we've got a nice thing here, which is a document written by one of our trainers who got incredibly excited about how interesting and exciting and engaging component 1 and component 2 can be to teach. And he's written I never counted whether there's 41 different ideas in there, but definitely well worth a look if you're thinking of getting started. So there's very useful material here in the teaching and learning materials. In the internal assessments tab here, we have authorized assignment briefs. Now, if you have a quick look at this, you can see you've got component 1 learning aim C, component 1 learning aim A, component 1 learning aim B. So 3 separate authorized assignment briefs looking at a learning aim on its own. So here for component 2, you've got A, B, and C. But also for component 2, we've put up an authorized assignment brief which combines learning aims A, B, and C. Now, in BTEC, we generally encourage smaller bits of assessment, like a learning aim, teaching, learning, practice, assessment. Learning aim B, teaching, practice, assessment. But if you prefer, it's perfectly fine to teach A, B, and C and then do an assessment at the end. It's a higher stake assessment in terms of, if you get something wrong, it can be trickier to recover from because it's covering a lot more. Smaller chunks of assessment, we think, fit 14 to 16-year-olds probably better, but it does mean more organization and more paperwork for you. Doing it in one chunk here is a possibility, and so do have a look into them. We've got the data files for component 2 here that tie into the authorized assignment briefs and tie into some of the sample marked learner work that you see here. We've got so-called OSCE materials. This you could interpret as being standardization materials. So this is helping you to understand how the marking grid is applied to the evidence that's shown. So that's very useful material. By the way, the silver padlock on the right-hand side only means that you need your Edexcel Online username and account. It just means that it's not free for students to grab. When you look at the authorized assignment briefs, you may choose to use this authorized assignment brief for assessment. So you don't give it, the kids don't see it until the handout date because it's a formal assessment. I would very much recommend that when you're talking to your students about a BTEC qualification, you don't use the word coursework, because coursework is identified in the minds of students as something that goes on forever and ever, and I can always add a bit, and sir or miss will have to mark it. No, it's a formal assessment. It's a hard handout date, hand-in date. So that's lots of really good material here, including sample marked learner work, which is more standardization training material for you. And the sample marked learner work isn't at every, there isn't an example of every grade for every learning aim, but there's a good sample across section here. There's 10 pieces of sample marked learner work. If we look at the external assessment, so that's component 3, there is one set of sample marked learner work. So it shows an example of, from the SAM, the sample assessment material that's over here, how that would have been marked and what the mark grid would have looked like and how it was addressed. There is also an additional sample assessment. So we should probably padlock this, because this we had to make available for approval of the qualification. If we padlock this, it would be a very sensible thing to use for a mock. Okay, so that's a quick flush through those materials. So that's what we have in terms of free. And you see it's authorized assignment briefs, past papers and mark schemes. Now, My BTEC is a tool which enables you to build courses and register students, not register students, add students onto courses, and all of the steps required for the formal delivery of a BTEC are captured in my BTEC. You don't have to have paper forms. It captures all the evidence that a SV would need to see. So when your SV is looking at a sample of students' work, they also need to see the forms that indicate what assessment it was, what assignment brief was used, what learning aim assessments you gave, whether it was LV'd and what date it was IV'd. All of those things are captured in my BTEC. So it's a tool that's really worth looking at if you're doing the delivery for the first time and you're worried that you might get a step wrong. My BTEC won't let you get make a mistake or forget any of the documentation trail. And then when your SV comes to the point where they need to look at your stuff, you would send them the student work in whatever way you'd organized, but you're not needing to print out any forms to also provide to them, because they can log on to My BTEC in your center and they can see all of the evidence they need for the admin side of things. So My BTEC is a really excellent thing to look at. We also have some, and that also covers the assessment tracking. My BTEC does. We've got I've got a little tool that you might want to have a look at, which I found useful. I built this because I thought it was useful. If you look at, so this is for the DIT. We've got, I hope you're able to see that okay. I'll make it a little bit bigger. This is like for a class of 30 kids. If I wanted to go to the assessment for student 10, wow, that's small. So learning aim A, learning aim B, learning aim C. If the student gets distinction on learning aim A, B, and C, I'm double clicking these cells to turn them yellow. I built this because it reminded me of tasks when I was assessing in school, where I'd use a highlighter pen. So what you're doing, you're highlighting. So it's very clear here that if learning aim A, B, and C are all distinction, the student overall will get a level 2 distinction for this component. What's important to note is if a learning aim ends up unclassified, it's not possible to get a pass outcome for the component. So it's a message that really needs to be made to all of your students that if they want to avoid failing, they cannot fail any of these learning aims assessments. So if students do very poorly in A, B, and then now in C, they start to take it seriously, it's quite limited what their outcome can be. So this tool I found useful. So there you go. This is student 10. It's a level 1 merit. So I'm going to go back to the records. If you look at student 10 here, it's a level 1 merit overall, which is 15 points. Now, if we wanted this student to have a level 2 pass as the target, at this stage, it's not possible to get to target. So let's have a look at what they could get on component 2. So we'll go to component 2, we'll go to student 10, and we'll go to the assessment grid here. Well, let's say we give this student a level 1 merit as well. Level 1 merit, back to records. So now 15 points on both of the internally assessed components. If the target is a level 2 pass, then for the component 3, the student needs to get 39 points, which is a level 2 merit. So you can customize your student's target and then know what they need, what the outcome needs to be for component 3. So anyway, that's a little tool. I mean, if for nothing else, I think it's an idea that you can show students that, if they're careless, they can end up with nothing. If they get an unclassified on either of the two components, any three of the components, if they end up with unclassified, then they end up with a fail overall. So that's a tool, and I think it's attached to the materials. So that's some of the stuff that we also provide. There are training courses, which some are, there's nothing available at the moment on the website, but I can keep you posted on that. So that's a quick flick through there. Subject page, we looked at qualification page. Let me just show you this. So there's the qualification page with all of the information for DIT. Hopefully you feel like it's well resourced. We certainly think it is. You have access to me as well. I'll show you that now. If you go to subjects, computer science and ICT, you land on my so-called subject page. So I have some news here. This tile talks to you about how to contact me. This is, I think, important to sign up to subject advisor updates. Please do sign up every month, pretty much every month, sometimes 2 a month. I'll put out newsletters that will inform you about important aspects to do with your qualifications. So do please sign up to the subject advisor updates. In here we've got the DIT tracker. These little films are tutorials on how to use it to run reports and how to work with student targets. There's some DIT Award videos here, which these are the videos that explain what the qualification is all about, with Atif, our sector manager, is delivering them. I'm running out of steam. Let me see now. I think after this we go on to, okay, so we spoke about my BTEC. Really well worth a look. If you have any issues with it, please contact me directly. Here's my contact details. The teachingict@pearson.com is the most efficient way of getting hold of me. Please do write that down. Oh, look at that. The phone numbers have changed. I should change the slide. What are my phone numbers now? Yeah, you see them here. So you go to the qualifications, subjects, computer science and ICT, and you'll see my numbers, direct phone numbers there. Okay, let me see, what have we got? 7 minutes is all that's left, so I'm going to stop talking. Please do chip in if you have any questions. I'll try to answer them. Either put your hand up or put in the chat box your question. Could you speak some more about how you would approach a holistic method of teaching component 3 with 1 and 2 would go? I know that James is putting a SOW together, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. Yeah, me too. The only thing I have at the moment, which I helped James put together, was this mapping of assessment objectives from component 3 and where in the other components they seem to match. So I'm looking forward to seeing his scheme of work as well. At the moment, the schemes of work that we have on our website and that are available don't interact intelligently. They do some component 3 in parallel, but that's only to enable it to be delivered in time for the January session. So yeah, it will be interesting to see how he's mushed those together. But in the document that I showed you, 40 Ways to Teach, most of the ideas come up. So where he said, what's it called? Bear with me. If you go here, tech levels. So we're going to the qualification page, digital information technology, course materials. I'm pretty sure it's James Jackson. You put Jamie, I don't know whether that's right. So this document down here, 40 Ways to Teach, most of the ideas about the crossovers are referenced in that, so that's worth a look. We've also got some films. I should show you that, actually. That's quite nice. YouTube. I don't know if they're listed in the subject materials. I have loads of stuff here. Just bear with me. DIT teaching tips. So that link there, let me put it in chat to everyone. That library covers component 1, 2, and 3 learning aims with delivery options, and so this is also James very enthusiastically rolling through loads of different ways of making it exciting to deliver. So please do dip into that and have a look. If there are any other questions. Okay, thank you so much for your time. I hope that we can keep in touch, and that you feel that you know more about DIT than you did, and maybe it can be one of your options going forward.